Well, folks, happy Friday the 13th. With that said, I figured we'd do something cool, special, and weird for Jason's big holiday, right here on TobattoVision. Today, I am going to rank the smells of Jason Voorhees, aka how bad does Jason Voorhees stink from ripe to rotten. Let's rank the undoubtedly foul odor of the Hockey-masked Madman. Now, for those of you who are still here and who haven't unsubscribed from the channel after hearing what the topic of this video is, let me just say thanks for sticking around. And with that said, let's dive in to the smells of Jason Voorhees. So, here's the ranking screen, and as you can see, there are several tiers of disgust, ranging from least offensive, which would be 0 and up, to the most offensive, which would be a solid 10. If you look on the left, a list of all the on-screen versions of Jason can be seen, all of them ready to be ranked, and don't worry, I am going to be describing each version's explicit smells in great and putrid detail, basing these rankings on what I believe each version would smell like. And again, we are going to be going through each Jason as he appears in the franchise, from the original through the 2009 reboot. Got it? Are we clear on the rating system? No? Okay, well, let's do it anyway. Here we go. Number 1, Lake Muck Jason from Friday the 13th. Since we don't really see the actual kid Jason in the film, other than through hallucinations and flashbacks, let's just judge this solely on his appearance at the end of the film, when Alice has a nightmare about him springing out of the lake and pulling her below, an event that is soon revealed to her to have just been a dream. Or was it? Well, it was, because Jason would have already been full grown by this point, living out in the damn woods somewhere. But even if this was a dream, he still interacts with our main character in some way, and hence, I figured I'd include it. I think I'm going to give Lake Muck Kid Jason a solid 1. Probably not a terrible stench coming off this guy, but at least some attention-grabbing notes of lake muck, rotting lake vegetation, and the freshwater smell of Crystal Lake itself. Or is it brackish water, since some versions of the lake seem to have a channel out to the ocean? Either way, Lake Muck Jason, solid 1 for lake muck, rotting vegetation, and lake water. So, basically he smells like the lakes and swamps here in Florida pretty much do all year long. Number 2. Sackhead Jason from Friday the 13th Part 2. Okay, so, our first version of adult Jason in the series, and one that's revealed to have been living in the woods for decades since his assumed drowning, living off the land, building a ramshackle dwelling out of stuff he can steal and find, killing those who cross his path or tread upon the campgrounds of Crystal Lake. You know, what we eventually come to expect from the human version of Jason Voorhees. With that said, who knows how long this guy was wearing those overalls and wearing that nasty old potato sack for a mask? Months? Years? I highly doubt Jason took baths in that damn lake, and to top it all off, he's got a toilet in that shack that he obviously uses, but no running water. You think this guy is washing his hands or wiping his ass? Not a chance in hell. I'm going to award Part 2 Jason with a strong 6.7. And I'm going to say he probably exudes a strong musk of nasty BO, shit, and mildew from living in that damp, moldy old hut for so long. Number 3. 3D Jason from Friday the 13th Part 3 in 3D. For whatever reason, after surviving his alleged demise at the end of Part 2, we see Jason struggle to his feet, leave his potato sack mask behind, and venture out into the night to, for whatever reason, steal some new clothes from a local lakefront store, before eventually arriving at Higgins Haven and continuing his reign of terror. But the clothing swap is really what helps the ranking of this particular version of Jason. By switching out of those nasty-ass overalls in exchange for at least some new pants and shirt, God knows if he changed his boxers or not, Jesus Christ. That immediately makes him less funky than his depiction in Part 2. I'm going to give 3D Jason a solid 5 for this film. Because while his clothes may be fresh, he's still got some funky body odor going, probably still has a subtle hint of human shit reeking through that fabric, and definitely smells like fresh hay from spending so much time in that damn barn. So yeah, not as bad as Part 2, but definitely not great either. Side note, I wonder if he had been stealing his clothes from that store the whole time, or if this was a new thing for him. Number 4. Unlucky Day Jason from Friday the 13th, the final chapter. In Jason's final but not really final chapter, we immediately catch up to him in the barn, assumed dead, and soon moved to the Wessex County morgue, where he, naturally, wakes up from his axe-induced nap and continues his bloody rampage, now on a mission to return to the Crystal Lake area, killing anybody he comes across. Since this is truly the same version of Jason from the last film, same clothes, same unbathed hillbilly, but now even sweatier and dirtier than ever, I'm going to give Unlucky Day Jason a 5.6. Blistering our noses with a strong musk of nasty body odor, a fading but still present hint of human shit, plus his recent change of clothes is definitely funky and dirtied at this point. This is 3D Jason on steroids as far as that smell is concerned. But hey, at least he takes a dip in the lake in this movie and gets somewhat of a bath. Plus all the rain from that storm later on in the movie. Yeah. Do I think it really helps him get any cleaner though? Meh. Probably not. Probably just makes him smell a bit more like lake mud and wet dog. But at least he's being a bit more proactive with his hygiene, right? Still better than how he smelled in Part 2, that's for sure. Number 5. Zombie Jason from Friday the 13th Part 6. Jason Lives. Ah yes, my favorite film in the series and the birth of the iconic zombie version of Jason Voorhees, buried in the ground for years and years after the events of Final Chapter, only to be resurrected by Tommy Jarvis being a fucking idiot by digging him up in the first place, and starting an entirely new era of Voorhees killings in the Crystal Lake area. Killings that would never have taken place if Tommy had just left him buried in the first place. But I digress. On with the smell. Since this Jason has been dead for a long while, and he's pretty much a mummified skeleton by the time he wakes up again, beyond some maggots that are for some reason buried in his coffin with him and eating his long since dead flesh, I'd say this Jason is probably somewhat of an upgrade from the smell of the previous iterations. The smell of bad body odor is probably gone. I'm sure the human shit problem has been resolved by time. So with that said, I think I'm, to the surprise of many of you, I'm sure, going to award this Jason with a solid stink of 4.8. With some pretty potent whiffs of wet dirt, some heavily mildewed clothing, and some vague, subtle hints of old decomposition. You know, that smell of something rotting that is pretty much done rotting but still sort of has a tiny bit of that dissipating stink left? Yeah, that. He seems much more dried out and sort of done rotting than he is in the following movies beyond Jason Lives. So I think the dominant smell of mildew and dirt for Jason Lives Jason calls for a solid 4.8. Number 6. Rage Jason from Friday the 13th Part 7, The New Blood. This Jason starts off still chained to the bottom of Crystal Lake, after God knows how long since the events of Jason Lives. By the time he's accidentally woken from his slumber and released from his watery grave by Tina, Jason appears more actively rotten than ever before, now looking more like a corpse in full-on decomposition mode than he appeared in Jason Lives, with chunky, thick flesh rotting right off the bone, an exposed spine and ribcage, and clothes that are waterlogged and beyond tattered. With that said, I think this Jason earns a strong 9. The first high stench ranking of this video thus far. This Jason smells like a combination of rotting meat, years worth of old lake mud and sediment, and some really moldy, really ripe, old waterlogged clothing. Definitely the gnarliest smelling Jason so far. Number 7. Slimy Dead Fish Jason from Friday the 13th Part 8, Jason Takes Manhattan. When we catch up with Jason at the start of Jason Takes Manhattan, he's again confined to the bottom of Crystal Lake. And again, for God only knows how long. It looks like Tina's dad did quite a number on him at the end of The New Blood, because not only is this Jason chained up, but he's covered with bits and pieces of the dock destroyed by Tina at the beginning of Part 7. At least, that's where I'm assuming these giant pieces of wood came from. He's also magically changed into an all-black costume, and is now sporting some very bougie black leather gloves. But that's really besides the point. The usual havoc ensues once JTM Jason is resurrected, only this time aboard a cruise ship, and eventually New York City. Throughout the film, Jason is coated in a perpetual drippage of slime, or lake muck, or whatever you want to call it. His skin is light blue in color, or light gray, or sometimes even light tan depending on the lighting. But either or, regardless of the color, this Jason's skin texture resembles that of a rotting, bloated dead fish, hence my nickname of Slimy Dead Fish Jason. He somewhat looks less rotted than he was in Part 7, but at the same time, somehow, feels all the more waterlogged in this film. I can't really pinpoint what it is, but I have a feeling that this is the nastiest Jason as far as smells go. With that said, I feel like Jason Takes Manhattan Jason deserves a hardcore 10 on the Jason Smellometer. A perfect score as far as nasty Jason stenches go, with this guy no doubt smelling like a horrible combination of rotting fish, rotting human meat, stagnant lake muck, and some nasty-ass old well water. You do not want to be anywhere near this putrid abomination. Number 8. Toxic Avenger Jason from Jason Goes to Hell, The Final Friday. Somehow back in Crystal Lake after the events of Jason Takes Manhattan, and once again occupying the Crystal Lake area, Jason Goes to Hell introduced us to a grislier, bloated, burned, melted, and more gnarled version of Jason than we'd ever seen before. A version that is no doubt undead, but one that also appears flesh-colored once again, versus the typical browns, blues, and greens of the previous 3 zombie Jasons. His appearance, which I've dubbed as Toxic Avenger Jason, looks the way you might expect after having toxic waste dumped directly atop his head, and then tidal waved by even more toxic waste at the end of the last film, which is why I very much think he resembles Toxie from the Toxic Avenger franchise. But anyways, plot and story and the logic of him getting back from the New York City sewers to New Jersey aside, Jason Goes to Hell Jason is one mean-looking, mean-smelling, rotten motherfucker. and I will have to award this version of Jason a strong 9.5. Now, some of you are probably saying, wait a minute, how could this version smell worse than Part 7? Well, I'll tell you why. Because this mutated blob of toxic zombie is followed closely by his own fuming stench mixture of rotting meat, chemical fire, most likely from the toxic waste burns, burned bacon, moldy dirt, and God knows what else. I just feel like this guy smells worse than New Blood Jason for sure. Not as bad as JTM Jason, but definitely right there in between the two. Number 9. Straight Jacket Jason from Jason X. Ah yes, the classic version of Jason Voorhees as seen in the first 2 acts of the infamous Jason X, aka Friday the 13th Part 10. This movie is hard to pin down as far as canon and timeline are concerned, because this film doesn't really make sense from a linear story standpoint, because this would have to take place somehow after Jason Goes to Hell and after Freddy vs. Jason. So it just raises more questions than it answers. But anyways, we are not here to talk about that. We're here to talk about smell. And I believe this version of Jason falls somewhere in the terrible but not too terrible realm of bad smells. Because although this is definitely a nasty looking Jason, it's sort of unclear whether he's intended to be human Jason or zombie Jason. I mean, there's a line where they talk about his ability to regenerate lost and damaged tissue. So perhaps this was zombie Jason and he's finally become somewhat in the realm of human again after such a long stretch of regenerating for all those years. I don't know. But what I do know is that he fucking stinks nonetheless. The dirty matted tufts of hair, that slimy face under his hockey mask, those layers and layers of tattered clothes. I'm going to give Jason X Jason a solid 6. Because he's definitely not as bad as some of the other Jasons, and he's got the benefit of having been in a research facility for quite some time, which is probably cool and climate controlled in and of itself. So Jason's probably had some time to de-ripen a bit, but he's no doubt still packing a decent punch of gnarly BO, perhaps the slightest hint of rotting and or burned meat, ever so slightly, and old, mildewed clothing. You do not want to be downwind of this guy. Jason X Classic Jason, solid 6. Number 10. Uber Jason from Jason X. The third act of Jason X sees Jason going full-on cyborg mode, and it is as glorious and cool and epic as you'd ever hoped it could be. One thing about Jason X is that it's never afraid to be Jason X. With that said, I am going to bet that this version of Jason is the best smelling version of the character out of the entire franchise. And I'm not even saying simply the least offensive, but he probably doesn't really smell bad at all, to be honest. I mean, think about it. He was completely rebuilt by nanobots, in a sterile environment no less. His costume is now black rubber, or whatever that material is supposed to be. His mask and machete are newly formed space metal, and his skin, although mutated looking and reptilian, is new flesh. He hasn't had time to stink yet, hasn't had time to be killed and resurrected as a rotting zombie. So with that said, I am going to give Uber Jason a 0.5 on the Jason smellometer. Only because I feel like he would have some heavy notes of new car smell, new shoe smell, and maybe the tiniest note of electrical fire. Simply because he was remade in space, and that just seems like an appropriate smell, but it would be ever so subtle at best. This is the one Jason you could actually have a pleasant time standing next to, smell-wise. Being murdered would really be the only issue. Number 11. Bog Mummy Jason from Freddy vs. Jason. Bog Mummy? Bog Mummy, you say? Well, yeah, that felt like a solid nickname for this guy. I mean, look at him. His skin is leathery and black, and he looks a lot like those bog mummies we used to see in all those mummy books as kids in the 90s. What was that one mummy called? The Tolland Man? He was that mummy they found out in like the peat moss of the bog or something. To me, he looks like that guy. At least as far as his skin texture goes. But anyways, I'm rambling. FVJ is the franchise return of full-blown zombie Jason. And the movie basically begins with him crawling out of the ground in Crystal Lake. Not even really a proper grave site like in Part 6, but just sort of buried out there in the woods. I'm not sure if this is supposed to be the same spot where he got sucked down into the ground at the end of Jason Goes to Hell or what, but I have a feeling this guy is still really rank. Unlike Jason Lives Jason, who was already long since rotted, pretty dried out, and had his own proper coffin to decompose in, beyond the random eye maggots again, of course. This version of Zombie Jason still seems pretty juicy and wet, as if he's half bog mummy and half rotting corpse. Like actively rotting. So with that said, I'm going to have to give this tall, lumbering Frankenstein of a Jason an 8.3. Nowhere near as bad as some of the other zombie Jasons, but by and large worse than the stench of Jason Lives Jason. I have a feeling that Bog Mummy Jason reeks of rotting meat, mildew, wet dirt, a lot of black mold, and gross-ass old leather that has started to stink. You know, when leather gets old and it doesn't get treated right, so it starts to rot from within and it has that nasty-ass leather smell. Any idea of what I'm talking about? Well, that. So, Bog Mummy Jason, pretty nasty motherfucker right there. Keep your nostrils away from this guy. 8.3. Number 12. Cocaine Jason from 2009's Friday the 13th reboot. Ah, reboot Jason. How I loathe you. Okay, I shouldn't use the word loathe. I don't hate any of the Jasons, nor do I hate any of the Jason performances. But that's a topic for another video. Let me just say that I found the reboot on the whole to be extremely underwhelming, which isn't Derek Mears' fault. But again, another topic for another time. Let's talk about the smell of our final Jason Voorhees depiction of the franchise, which hopefully isn't really the permanent final version, but it is one that's been our final version for 13 years and counting now. So Reboot Jason, or as I like to call him, Cocaine Jason, because, well, dude seems like he's on fucking cocaine for the entire fucking movie, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, it's just a fact. Honestly though, if we're talking about smells, which we are, I feel like Cocaine Jason fits right in there closely with Sackhead Jason from the original sequel, which makes sense because this Jason is basically another version of that Jason anyway. I will give this version a slight edge though, because he does seem a lot sweatier and dirtier than Sackhead Jason, so this reboot version of Jason earns a hefty 6.9. Like Sackhead Jason from Part 2, Cocaine Jason from the reboot likely exudes a strong stench of nasty-ass body odor, human shit, straight-up piss, a lot of mold and mildew from living in those underground corridors for so long, and maybe a lingering surface-level stench of human decomposition, only because he lives down there with all those bodies, with little to no ventilation. I mean, that smell is eventually going to start sticking to him at some point, right? Regardless, this filthy motherfucker is nobody you want to be around, especially not within close quarters. Gross. And there we have it, folks, the official TobattoVision ranking of the smells of Jason Voorhees. Probably one of the weirder ranking videos you've ever seen based on the subject matter, I assume. But yeah, I think we're done. Unless you guys are up for a bonus round.
Bonus round.
As you all know, we have Pamela Voorhees on the left and Roy Burns on the right. Two infamous Friday the 13th franchise killers that, while are not Jason Voorhees, I think deserve to be ranked in smelliness all the same, don't you? So, with that said, let's rank these two bonus round bad guys. Pamela Voorhees from Friday the 13th, 1980. And we're only ranking the original Pamela Voorhees here, not the remake Pamela Voorhees, not the Freddy vs. Jason Pamela Voorhees, and not the Part 3 Dream Sequence Pamela Voorhees. Simply classic, actual Mrs. Voorhees, which we all know by now is the killer of the original film, not Jason himself. By the film's conclusion, I'd say Mrs. Voorhees is really sweaty, really dirty, and probably feeling a little bit like she lost her head. So with that said, I'm going to still give her a low ranking on the smellometer scale, maybe a 1.2. Because although she definitely has a slight whiff of BO, and definitely a bit of wet dirt from running around the woods in the rain all night, I'd say she's probably also wearing a strong, very feminine perfume that simply hasn't worn off by the film's third act, and is probably doing a great job masking some of the growing ripeness. So Pamela Voorhees, 1.2. And last but not least, officially closing out this bonus round and this ranking video as a whole, Roy Burns from Friday the 13th Part 5, A New Beginning. The infamous copycat killer whose son was butchered at the halfway house, only to soon lose his mind, don a Jason-esque disguise, and begin killing everyone at the halfway house and the surrounding area. I fucking love Roy Burns as this copycat killer. But smelly-wise, I'm gonna have to give Roy a 3. And the reason I'm doing so is because Roy, although by the time the movie's over he might smell a little bit like B.O., he's been running around in the rain all night. He's not undead. He hasn't been living out in the woods. He still goes home every night, takes off his suit, and resumes a normal life, right? I mean, that's pretty much. But anyways, he's basically a regular guy, and being a paramedic is his day job. So I don't think Roy Burns smells that bad, except for maybe the slightest hint of B.O. at the end of the film. So with that said, it's probably the slightest hint of B.O., maybe the slightest hint of dirt and rain from running around the woods all night in the rain. But I feel like Roy Burns is a brute guy, so that brute probably helps mask a lot of the weird smell anyway. But he seems like somebody who wears too much brute, if that makes any sense, which maybe is one of those things where he doesn't smell good, but he doesn't smell bad. It's just too much cologne on top of the slight hint of wet dirt, rain, and B.O. So Roy Burns, you get a 3. All right, well, that's it. Let's rack them up from least to worst. At the bottom, we have Jason X Uber Jason, smelling the best with a 0.5. Up next, we have Part 1 Jason, 1. After that, we have Part 3 Jason with a strong 5. Next up is Part 6 Jason with a 4.8. After that, we have Part 4 Jason with a strong 5.6. Beyond that, we have Jason X Classic Jason with a strong 6. We then move on to Sackhead Jason from Part 2 with a good 6.7. After that, we go to Reboot Jason with a strong 6.9, immediately followed by Freddy vs. Jason Jason at 8.3. Then we go to Part 7 Jason with a strong 9, Jason Goes to Hell Jason with a 9.5, and Part 8 Jason with a 10. And if we add in the bonus round bad guys, we have Pamela Voorhees with a 1.2, and Roy Burns with a 3. There it is. Let me just say happy Friday the 13th. May 2022. It's been a lot of fun. And with that said, I'm going to go watch Jason Lives. Have a good rest of your day. Don't do anything Jason wouldn't do. And I'll see you later. Stay spooky.